Alrighty. So you guys know me. I'm Steve Shay from Universal Ship Cancellation Society. And late last year, I was trying to think of a presentation to do for this year. And it kind of occurred to me that Desert Storm was going to have its 35th anniversary in January. And it occurred to me that that was also going to be the exact half point of my life, 35 years ago. And it also occurred to me that I had a bunch of good covers that I thought might make a good presentation. So I thought I'd do a Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and try to fold in some coalition ships as well as chartered ships and just kind of talk about the history of Desert Shield, Desert Storm. So we'll talk about the history, talk about the dates, talk about why it was kind of a different kind of war in terms of philatelic covers, and then, of course, talk about Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and then after the war. So I'm sure all of you remember at least a little bit about Desert Shield, Desert Storm. We've all lived through it. Put us back into some of the perspective and the time frame and what was happening. Saddam started all this off by invading Kuwait in August of 1990. And at that point, Iraq had the fourth largest army in the world. So it wasn't a small army, and it was an army of actually great concern to what became the coalition. Over a period of time, the UN finally issued an ultimatum to him to withdraw from Kuwait in November of 1990. He didn't, obviously. And the US started something called Operation Desert Shield way back in August, right after he invaded Kuwait. Desert Shield would run all the way through January 17th, 91. And during that period, the US and other nations combined to make a 33 nation coalition. And that coalition, some sent forces to the Middle East, some sent ships, some sent planes, some sent money. So it was a little bit of everything from different countries. Smaller countries may contribute to just a ship or a hospital, but it was definitely a coalition. Then we get to January of 91. That ultimatum expires. And then that leads us right into Desert Storm on January 17th. Didn't last very long. February 28th was the end. And then something called Operation Desert Farewell, and it started after that as everybody started going out of the region, going back home. To me, the reason this incident is different for us in terms of philatelic coverage. If you think back to World War II covers, which all of us collect, or pre-World War II even, and Korean War covers, and even Vietnam covers a little bit. There weren't philatelic covers in those wars. Nobody was sending the ships in World War II and, USS Enterprise, give me a cancel on, what next time you invade Midway. None of that was happening. It was lots of real mail from World War II, and we probably all collect a little bit of that, and that's probably true for the Korean War too. Real mail. Nobody was sending to LSTs saying, next time you go over to invade Incheon, why don't you cancel this cover for me and put a cachet if you have one? Those didn't exist. And even in the Vietnam War, yeah, people were sending to ships, but it wasn't quite the same as what I think Desert Shield, Desert Storm turned into. During this incident, and I really wasn't aware of it at the time, to be perfectly honest with you. I've only learned about it as I got more into cover collecting like 10 years later, but there were a lot of people sending for covers and they were getting covers. And that's what I'm going to be able to show in this presentation. So as I found all these covers through the years, I kind of wondered, well, how did everybody know where to send? And, how did they know what ships were there? How did they know what merchant ships were there? Because there were lots of merchant ships, as you'll see. And so I looked in the USCS log, and there's really only a couple of articles. First one appeared in October 1990. So that was, right sort of in the heart of Desert Shield. And there's an article talking about ships and which ships have sailed in the Middle East group, which ships are in a certain battle group and things like that. But I didn't see addresses in the article, but it was a, hey, something's going on. And in fact, in the very first paragraph, it said, if you send for covers, please send only two, the old philatelic currency thing. There was an article in March 91, so the month after everything ended, and the article would have probably been written in either late January or early February, actually, by Bob, due to publishing times. But again, it talks about ships being deployed and when they deployed, and again, what group they're in. So a couple articles. And I found a couple articles in December 1990 issue. One of them talking about some cancels that were attributed to ships over there in the Mideast. And then two very helpful articles to me. Phil Schreiber wrote one about French vessels, which deployed to the Persian Gulf. And then David Bernstein wrote one about the British ships that deployed. So very helpful articles that gave me information that I didn't have, though I have the covers, and you'll see them. And just to kind of give you a reference with a map of the area, map hasn't changed any. We've still got 5 bodies of water we're most interested in: Persian Gulf, Gulf of Oman, the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, and the Eastern Med. And then there's 3 countries that are most of interest to this, Iraq, Kuwait, and then Saudi Arabia, with Saudi Arabia being where all of the staging was done for Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And if we get into the history, August 2nd is when Iraq invaded Kuwait. This is a picture of a building that's been damaged during the invasion in Kuwait. At the time, Iraq accused Kuwait of doing something called slant drilling, which is kind of drilling underneath the border of Kuwait and Iraq, but getting to oil that actually was underground in Iraq territory. I don't know if that was a true thing they were doing or just an accusation. And also at the time, Iraq owed Kuwait a very large debt, which I assume they figured they could get rid of by invading the country. That led us to Desert Shield. And mentioned before, the forces were building up between August and January. A lot of naval forces building up, logistics built up. All the forces had to get their equipment, their supplies, their hospitals, their men, and everything overseas. The air forces were building up and the ground forces were building up. Most of this all in Saudi Arabia. I'm not going to talk about air forces or ground forces today. I don't have the covers to support that. Though to be perfectly honest, the air forces are the most interesting part of me to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, but I don't have the covers to talk about it. The covers I have, I'm going to show you some close-up pictures so you can see them a little better than you'll see them later in the presentations. I sort of started this hobby by buying a collection from a guy named George Cosentini. George was a USCS member. He has since passed away. I bought his cover at an auction in a stamp show in Santa Clara, California. Just thought it was kind of neat. It wasn't very expensive. And I got a whole ton of covers, and I was just amazed at the types of covers George had collected. I was amazed at covers like the one you're seeing here from merchant ships, because I really didn't know those existed. George sent for covers right and left, and some of the other guys I'm going to show you covers from did the same thing. This is a neat cover from the SS Cape Florida, March 91, so it's just after everything ended. A lot of people were just sending to the ships direct, getting the ship's rubber stamp cachet, as in the upper left-hand corner. That covers just a cachet from the nuclear cruiser South Carolina. Stuart Milstein, USCS member, sent for a lot of covers. And I have a lot of his that he's sold on eBay since then. But just a nice little cover, just pretty plain, but it's canceled and got rubber stamps from a merchant ship, the SS Ashley Likes. This Desert Shield in blue ink is something a guy named Michael Sabatelli, who was also a USCS member, created, and Stuart used it on many of his covers. There is a similar shield called Desert Shield in red ink, and you'll see that on some of the covers. I had asked Stuart, I said, how did you know what ships were where? How did you know the Ashley Likes was involved in Desert Shield, Desert Storm? And he said he and a few others of the back east members would scan newspapers. They would watch the news on TV. They would read the log. They would read some naval magazines, and they'd learn what ships were going, and they would send off for covers. And as I said, they got a lot of nice covers that way. Steve Kovacs made some. That's the gray envelope you see in the upper left. There's some nice covers of his. You'll see several of them. Printed cachet. The Admiral Byrd chapter had a pretty generic cachet, but they got it canceled aboard a number of the ships. Leroy Middleton. I also bought his collection of Desert Shield, Desert Storm covers. They're all just rubber stamp ship cachets like this one, but he also used his own rubber stamp and he applied either Operation Desert Shield or Operation Desert Storm on them. But they're all in the right time period. They're definitely things that were sent to the ships that were there. It's kind of neat. Truman Botar, he was also a USCS member. He made some kind of interesting covers with caricatures. Here we see Saddam, and this particular cover canceled on the last day of Desert Storm rather, sorry. And it's autographed by a Vice Admiral Henry Mouse, which was commander of the Naval Forces Central Command through December of 1990. USS Los Angeles chapter also had a generic cachet sent off to a number of ships. I got a few of those. And Roger Wentworth, probably know Roger, another USCS member. He also made some cachets. He had several with the map sent to different ships, but he's got some others, as you'll see. And a J.R. Hemingway had a printed cachet, which I have a number of. Started out as a Desert Shield cachet, as in the upper left. Sent to ships, got the rubber stamp cachet, as you see here for the USS England. But then as things progressed, he used that same cachet. He just crossed out Shield and made it Desert Storm. That worked. So as Desert Shield started occurring and the coalition started coming together and the U.S. Navy started sending ships to the area, first thing they sent were the different carrier battle groups. One of them was the Dwight Eisenhower battle group, arrived on station in the Red Sea. This is a Kovacs cover, as you can see, and what Steve did on his covers, right above the map portion of the cachet, he listed the area the ships were in, or at least as he expected them to be in, and this one is right dead on station in the Red Sea. That's where the battle group went to. This is a frigate, John L. Hall, that was in that same battle group. You may remember frigates. Our Navy doesn't have any today, but we used to have a lot of frigates, and you'll see several different covers from frigates in different battle groups. More ships from the same battle group, the Scott, Suribachi, and Ticonderoga. A nice Kovacs cachet in the lower left, autographed by the CO. Again, things like that surprise me. Here you are, kind of getting ready to go to war, and people are still getting covers, and COs are taking the time to service them and sign them. Another carrier group was the Independence Battle Group. Went to the Gulf of Oman, and this particular battle group would depart the area in December, so it wasn't around for Desert Storm, but it was certainly there for Desert Shield, doing the interdiction of traffic between or coming out of Iraq or going into Iraq. This is a nice non-philatelic cover, canceled aboard the Independence from somebody in the dental department, lieutenant. And a nice patch for the Gulf tournament in 1990. Other ships of that Independence Battle Group, Antietam, Bruton, Cimarron, and the Flint. There's a Roger Wentworth cachet, just a rubber stamp cachet from the ship, and a couple Kovacs cachets. Rest of the ships in that battle group, Goldsboro, Jewett, Reasoner, and White Plains, and another Kovacs and Wentworth cachet. Another carrier battle group that went there was the John F. Kennedy carrier that just went out of commission, no, a couple of years ago, I guess it was. This battle group arrived on station in the Red Sea, and they would be there through Desert Storm, not departing until March 12th. And a nice Wentworth cachet, kind of attractive. Some of Rogers' cachets were a little funny, I think, in my opinion, but this one's pretty nice, attractive. Canceled on Thanksgiving Day, as a matter of fact. And some ships of that battle group, the San Jacinto, the Seattle, and Sylvania. Another nice non-philatelic cover from the Seattle, sent from a sailor in December. And the nuclear cruiser Mississippi. We don't have nuclear cruisers anymore, as you know. And cover probably made by Ken Hansen with a caricature of Saddam claws. And a nice patch that matches that ship, the USS Thomas Gates, a nice cruiser. Very nice looking patch. Midway Battle Group went to the Arabian Gulf, stayed through Desert Storm. Another one of those Wentworth cachets. Bunker Hill was one of the cruisers in that battle group. This is one of those Hemingway cachets. Kurtz, Fife, and Hewitt were three of the ships in that battle group. Cruiser Mobile Bay. This is one of those Los Angeles chapter, pretty generic cachet, but canceled aboard different ships. This one canceled during Desert Storm, February of 91. And a good shot of the cruiser. And three more ships that were in that battle group, the Ollendorf, San Jose, and Sterett. Saratoga Battle Group, one other battle group that went to the area. They passed through the Suez Canal, going back and forth a couple times. This cachet was meant for the third Suez Canal transit in October, although it's canceled during Desert Shield in January of 91. The Biddle, one of the cruisers in the battle group, and another Kovacs cachet, and a nice patch for that ship. The Biddle was part of the forces that were trying to interdict any traffic going via ocean to or from Iraq, making sure the wrong things weren't being taken. The Biddle actually had its rudder fall off, of all things. The ship was a single rudder ship, and the rudder just simply fell off. So the ship was towed partway through the Suez Canal by the Thomas C. Hart, and then from there she went to a port in France, steering by using her screws. A replacement rudder was put on, and then she rejoined the battle group. But I'm not sure I've heard of a ship that had a rudder fall off before. Elmer Montgomery, one of the frigates in that battle group. Again, the ships in most battle groups were tasked with interdicting and making sure nothing was being transported by ships that shouldn't have been. The Elmer Montgomery actually boarded 100 different ships as of January 9th, and she was designated a maritime centurion. If you're familiar with naval flights, if you get 100 traps on a carrier, you get a little patch that calls you a centurion. You can become a double centurion with 200, triple centurion with 300. Well, the Elmer Montgomery was designated a centurion for her 100 boardings of ships. This one's a little interesting, and again, it just shows you that folks were sending for stuff. This is a George Cosentini one. It's from the cruiser Philippine Sea. It was actually sent to him priority mail, and it contained a ship welcome aboard pamphlet, a nice color brochure about the ship, probably contains some covers, but again, here's it. It is October 1990, and someone aboard the ship, the postal clerk, has taken the time to answer his request for information from the ship. Things like that just didn't happen in World War II or any other war. Other ships from the battle group, Saratoga Battle Group, the Samson, Spruance, Thomas C. Hart. And another battle group, the America, arrived on station in the Red Sea. See another Wentworth Cachet and a very nice looking patch for the America, Operation Desert Shield. Some ships from that battle group, the Halliburton, the Kalamazoo, the cruiser Normandy, all rubber stamp cachets from the ship. The Nitro, an ammunition ship, and a nice photo of the ship from that period. And three other ships in that battle group, the Preble Virginia and the William V. Pratt. I don't have a Preble, so I can't show that one. I don't have one. But these are the other ships of that battle group. The Theodore Roosevelt battle group arrived on station in the Red Sea. Here we have a Taze Nicholson cover as the battle group departed, going up from the United States to the Persian Gulf during Operation Desert Storm. And here's a stationary cover from the Theodore Roosevelt. It's kind of got funky blue printing on it. It makes it hard to read the address. It makes it hard to read the cancel, but it's definitely non-philatelic mail, and you've got a patch here from the Theodore Roosevelt for Desert Storm. And a couple ships of that battle group, the Karen and the Hawes. Patch is from the helicopter detachment that was aboard the frigate Hawes. And the Leyte Gulf and the Platte, a couple more ships in the battle group. The Admiral Byrd chapter cover in the upper left was, again, one of those generic ones, but this one happens to be signed by the Deputy Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Central Command, so it's kind of neat cover. Signed right during the heart of Desert Storm, February 91. And the rest of that battle group, the Richard K. Turner, the Santa Barbara, the Vreeland. And another battle group from the USS Ranger. Nice patch, nice Wentworth cachet. Some of the ships of that battle group, the Francis Hammond, the Harry Hill, and the Horn, and a helicopter detachment patch for the helicopters that were on that destroyer. Other ships, the Jarrett, Kansas City, Paul F. Foster, and the Princeton. Shasta and the Valley Forge. The U.S. Navy also sent an amphibious group over to the Red Sea carrying Marines. Marines possibly going to be used to do an amphibious assault to free Kuwait. A non-philatelic from the Lamur County and LST, and a Byrd chapter, Nassau cover, and a one of those Middleton ship rubber stamp cachets from the Pensacola. Portland, also in that amphibious group, and this is a non-philatelic cover sent by a Navy lieutenant. Also, the Raleigh was in that group. The Saginaw, and a period photograph of the Saginaw. I guess Leroy Middleton probably did the typing on that cachet, but it says USS Saginaw carried the 4th Marine Expedition Brigade. So that was the Marine group expected to do the amphibious assault. And the Shreveport, another one in that group. And Spartanburg County, and another non-philatelic from the Trenton. This is a cover from Helicopter Marine Detachment 263, part of Marine Air Group 40. So, yeah, it's a Marine, but it's actually one of the aviators in the Marine. And one I like in particular, I think this is kind of a unique ship rubber stamp cachet, the Manitowoc. Nice looking one. And of course, there were other ships not assigned to either the battle groups or the amphibious group, but they were there for support. There's 3 different ones, Aubrey Fritz, Reed, and Taylor. And if you look at these Kovac cachets, you can see each one shows a different heading above the map to show where that particular ship was, or at least where he thought it would be when he sent the cover to them. And the Detroit, and a photo of the Detroit replenishing the John F. Kennedy. The Detroit's the middle ship there, and the bottom is a cruiser. And I mentioned there's coalition ships. Australia provided several ships to the coalition. Adelaide, Brisbane, Darwin, and Success. And you can see each of them had some sort of marking, some sort of cachet. The Adelaide upper left just has a boxed commanding officer, but you can see it's not only in English, it's also in one of the Middle East languages. Same for the Success rubber stamp in the lower right. Upper right, the frigate Darwin had a nice cachet with the ship and map of Australia. And the the Brisbane, lower right, lower left, had just a simple commanding officer rubber stamp. Here's a nice one with some attractive stamps, the frigate HMAS Sydney and her cachet. And France. France had ships there. That was what one of the articles in the log helped me with. And I also learned doing some research, it wasn't to the French and to the British, it wasn't Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. It was actually Operation Degas for the France. And for the naval part of it, they called it Operation Artemon. And these are four of the ships in that operation: the Aviso Commandant Toussaint, Clemenceau, Colbert, and Duplay. The Clemenceau was the lower left-hand corner. That was a helicopter carrier, and it transported helicopters, planes, and trucks to Saudi Arabia. Other French ships: La Montpaquet, Loire, Montcalm, and Aragon. The lower left has the ship's cachet that in this case actually says Artemon 90. That was a naval operation, they called it. So this one actually shows you that it was in that operation. Germany sent some mine countermeasure ships and a nice cachet showing their numbers and names. Italian Navy sent 7 ships: Labicio, Minerva, Orsa, and Sagittario. And I guess they must have had post offices aboard. A little hard for you to probably see, but the postmarks have the name of the ship, and they actually say Italian postage in it. So kind of neat covers. Very plain, but if they do the Nava Orsa in the upper right at least has some sort of cachet. And the San Marco, Stromboli, and Zafiro are the other 3 Italian ships involved. And of course, we have the Royal Navy. Operation Granby was their name for what we would call Desert Shield, Desert Storm. So they sent ships over as part of Operation Granby. This covers from the carrier Ark Royal. And you can see there is actually a cachet and then the box with the commanding officer stamp. This ship remained in the Med. I think the British decided, as a small carrier with just a few number of Harriers, probably not a lot of reason to go further because of all the U.S. Air Force and British Air Force and all the U.S. Navy aircraft that were there. The few Harriers probably weren't going to contribute a lot, so they didn't go any further. Other ships, the Battle Axe, the Dulverton, the Ledbury, and Manchester, and each of them had some sort of cachet that they applied, either from the ship's office or the CO. The Brilliant was actually a veteran of the Falklands War. In fact, the Brilliant shot down 2 or 3 Argentine jets. And the Jupiter, a frigate, and a nice photo of the Jupiter. And the Brits also sent over ships from the Naval Fleet Auxiliary. These are 4 of them: Argus, Almeida, Orange Leaf, and Resource. Orange Leaf was a tanker. One of them was a hospital ship, which escapes me right now. I can't remember which one of them, but one of them was a hospital ship. I believe it was the Argus. A couple other Royal Fleet auxiliary ships, the Sir Percival and the Tristram. Other countries sent ships over, but in fairly small quantities: Argentina, Belgium, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, and a few others. But primarily the main fleets for the U.S. And the ones we've seen here, British and French. And then we get into the merchant ships. Well, everything had to have some sort of transportation to get it to Saudi Arabia. You couldn't fly tanks, you couldn't fly the hundreds and thousands of tanks and trucks, so you had merchant ships taking stuff over. The Military Sea Lift Command was the organization in charge of that. Here we see three ships that were in that command: the American Osprey, the Bravado, and the Cape Ann. And again, these are types of covers that just kind of surprised me that ships serviced them and they had some sort of marking they applied. The American Osprey is a very nice cachet showing you Desert Storm, but the others are probably just markings they used for paperwork, but they applied them as cachet. Cape Alexander, and I've got a photo of some of these ships just to show you how different some of these merchant ships look. They certainly weren't all the same or by any means. The Cape Domingo, the Cape Gibson, and the bottom one, the Cape Gibson, is actually postmarked to Port Cancel, but you can read it says Air Force. So it was probably postmarked at an Air Force base, Air Force post office in Saudi Arabia during a Desert Storm. Cape Isabel, the Mississauga, the Mormixon, Santa Adela, all very different merchant ships, but all very much needed to carry all the supplies, all of the hospital ships, hospitals, all the airplanes, the tanks, the trucks, everything had to get over there, fuel, ammunition, and it was these types of ships that took it over there. Mm-hmm. Three more that were called afloat prepositioned ships, and you can kind of imagine those were ships that were prepositioned somewhere, ready to go at somewhat of a moment's notice to take supplies to whatever they're needed. There were 11 ships. These are three of them: the Advantage, American Cormorant, and Austral Rainbow. Most of these were stationed in Diego Garcia, so it wasn't a long trip from there to the Middle East. They carried ordnance, they carried a field hospital, carried all of the things you would need to get something set up very quickly. The Green Harbor, one of the prepositioned ships. A nice photo of it taken in San Francisco. I see the Golden Gate, I see Alcatraz. Very pretty picture, actually. Green Island oversees Alice and oversees Valdez. The Alice and Valdez were oilers. The Green Island was a container ship, all part of the preposition ship fleet. Overseas Vivian, Santa Victoria, and the Sea Lift Pacific were the others that rounded off out those 11 ships. And there were maritime preposition ships, 13 of them, carrying equipment mainly for the Marine Expeditionary Brigades. These were named after servicemen. You can see their rank: the Alex Bonneman Jr., the Baldomero Lopez, and the Jack Loomis. And again, they all have some sort of marking, whether it's as simple as a corner card or, as you can see on the Baldomero Lopez, a kind of some sort of seal, again, probably used on paperwork. Three others, part of that maritime preposition ship. At one time in December, there were over 253 ships assigned to the Military Sea Lift Command, which these ships were part of. So that gives you an idea of the size of the merchant ships. There were a number of merchant ships used in this operation. And one more preposition ship, Private First Class William B. Baugh. And again, you can see it's a very different type of ship. This one's a bulk container ship. And the Major Stephen W. Pless. one more of them. This is actually a photo of the ship unloading in Saudi Arabia, as a matter of fact. And the PFC Eugene O'Regan, one more, with New Orleans postage, probably on his return trip from the Middle East when it was when George got this cover. And three others, again, military ranks: James Anderson Jr., Major Kozak, and William R. Budden. There were fast sea lift ships involved. There were 8 of them. These were ships that were capable of making over 30 knots that can carried supplies and transportation equipment. The Antares and the Bellatrix, Capella, and again, the photo shows you again, that's a ship quite different from the others we've seen pictures of. The Nebula, Pollux, and Regulus. You can see all these are named after stars, as a matter of fact. These ships here on this slide carried elements of the 24th Infantry Division, which was one of the big divisions involved in the ground war. And there were merchant ships. Here's the SS Flickertail State. And again, you see a photo, which again, the ship's quite different looking than any of the other ships we've seen. The MV Rover, the Tampa Bay, and the Sealand Consumer, carrying cargo over there. So just lots of merchant ships. I've got other covers. There were just a lot of ships, over 200, like I said, and many of them produced covers for collectors. So it's kind of neat and amazing to me. This is a cover during the Desert Shield time. It's an interesting cover to me. It's a flown cover. It was flown aboard an F-14, and you can see the name of the pilot and the co-pilot. The date, October 1st, 1990, so definitely Desert Shield. From the carrier Independence. And its mission was an air demonstration flight. And in the remarks area, they wrote practice air show. So I guess they must have been putting on an air show for somebody, although I really don't know who. But kind of a neat cover, and the F-14 was a plane I always thought highly of. Hospital ships, you probably know these names, the USNS Mercy and the Comfort, both deployed to the Middle East. Both of these pieces are real mail, as a matter of fact. One during Desert Storm, one during Desert Shield. And you may be surprised, or at least I was surprised to know that the Cunard Line put one of their cruise ships, the Cunard Princess, in Bahrain to support folks going on 3-day passes. And their original plan apparently was to take short little cruises out of Bahrain for the 3 days. But eventually they gave up on that, and they docked the ship, but it was still open for folks on 3-day passes. So you get your 3-day pass, you go board the cruise ship for 3 days, and then go back to your duty. I had no idea this ship was involved. And that kind of takes us to the ending time of Desert Shield and takes us into Desert Storm. January 12th, Congress authorized the use of force against Iraq. And on January 17th, that was the first day of Desert Storm. The Navy fired over 100 Tomahawk missiles that day, with the San Jacinto firing the very first. Desert Storm was the first time the Navy had actually used Tomahawk missiles. Since then, we hear Tomahawk missiles just about every time anybody in the U.S. Navy goes to some country to do something. In fact, recently, a month ago, we heard of lots of Tomahawks being fired on Iran. Well, Desert Storm was the very first use of those missiles. Also on the 17th, the U.S. Navy launched 228 aircraft sorties from the 6 carriers in the region. The 18th, they fired additional Tomahawks. By the 20th, the coalition planes had flown 7,000 sorties in those 3 days. On the 18th, 2 Navy ships, the Tripoli and Princeton, struck mines and were damaged in the Arabian Gulf. They didn't sink. They were damaged and able to continue their mission. The 26th, the ground war had begun. Saddam announced that his troops were withdrawing from Kuwait. And President Bush, our president at the time, called that announcement an outrage. He isn't withdrawing, he's retreating, which was probably quite true. The Marine groups I talked about earlier executed feints to make the Iraqis believe a landing was going to occur in Kuwait, but it was nothing more than a diversion. 27th, really the last day of Desert Storm. At that point, over 50,000 enemy POWs have been captured, and U.S. Navy and Marine pilots have flown over 26,000 sorties during that period. And the 28th, the ceasefire holds and everything was over. Most of you may remember this. I certainly do. This is the first war I was actually watching live on TV. CNN was in Baghdad and they were showing explosions and they were broadcasting from Baghdad. Gary Shepard was reporting. This stuff just is seared in my mind because I remember watching it and how different it was. Today it's more commonplace to see people reporting right when a war is going on, but at the time it was very unusual to me. AP was putting out pictures showing explosions in Baghdad. Reporters were talking. Don't know if you recognize the reporter in the lower right. That was Arthur Kent. He was known as the Scud Stud because a lot of women thought he was pretty attractive. Got a nickname for himself. And as I mentioned, the Tomahawk missile was used for the very first time on that first opening in Desert Storm, firing mostly on Baghdad, command and control centers, radar centers, anti-aircraft centers. Ships involved were the San Jacinto, the Wisconsin, the Missouri, the Louisville, and the Pittsburgh. Fired 100 that first day, 228 for the entire war. The destroyer Fife, which I didn't even know had cruise missiles, fired 58 alone just from that destroyer. I vividly remember seeing a video once upon a time at the time taken by somebody in Iraq of a Tomahawk flying overhead. And I found that video on YouTube. You can find it if you look for it. This is a snippet from that video, but it simply shows a Tomahawk zipping over their head for the first time. This was the San Jacinto cover. It's not postmarked on the exact date, but again, this was the ship that fired the first Tomahawks on the 17th. And the Louisville was the sub that was firing Tomahawks the first time the Tomahawks have been fired in anger from a submerged sub. Naval aircraft were involved, obviously, from the carriers. A lot of different types of aircraft. We had the Tomcat with the Hornet, the Intruder, the Prowler, the Corsair, the Viking, the Hawkeye, the Seahawk helicopter, the Sea Knight helicopter, and the P-3 Orion. And a cover here, the second day of Desert Storm, canceled from aboard the Saratoga from somebody in VF-103, one of the fighter squadrons stationed aboard. And two of the carriers that were involved, Saratoga and John F. Kennedy. The John F. Kennedy cover in the lower right is autographed by Rear Admiral Nixon, who was the commander of the Red Sea Battle Force. And while all of these guys I've been showing you covers from were sending for covers, I was collecting trading cards. It's the only thing I knew to collect in 1990, 91. So I was collecting the different companies that put out trading cards for Desert Shield, Desert Storm. They provide pretty good pictures of the airplanes that were involved. And these are all the ones I was just mentioning a minute ago. And I got a photo of each of them. And I still have the cards and I still pull them out to enjoy looking at them every now and then. Steve Kovacs sent some covers to some of the squadrons and got some what I think are very attractive and unique covers. Both of these are canceled on the carriers that the squadron was on, and each are autographed by the CO and the XO. And postmarked both during Desert Storm. And 2 other Kovacs caches from squadrons, and a couple of patches from the VF-1 squadron, the fighter squadron with the Tomcats, and a couple of carrier patches, Theodore Roosevelt and the Midway. And some other patches, U.S. Ranger patch on the left, a squadron patch in the center, U.S. America on the right, and then on the lower left, squadron cover, a couple of Tomcat squadrons. And I mentioned battleships earlier. The Navy had battleships there, the Wisconsin and Missouri. This is a cover from the Wisconsin. Wisconsin fired 8 Tomahawks on that first night of Desert Storm. And at one point during Desert Storm, you may remember the battleships had these remotely piloted vehicles, which are very commonplace today, but they were kind of unique back then. And one of the Wisconsin's RPVs was flying over some Iraqi troops, and they actually surrendered to the RPV. I guess they'd had enough of the fighting, enough of the war, and they wanted to go home and see families. Here's a cover from the Missouri with cancellations January 16th and 17th. Nice cover. It's a photo of the Missouri firing off the Kuwaiti coast. And the things those battleships did is they actually fired over 1,000 16-inch rounds. 16-inch were the big guns. The Navy said that was equivalent to 542 A6 intruder missions, just those guns and those shells. And of their targets, 68% of them received heavy damage or worse. And if you wondered whatever they were shooting at, they were shooting at things like artillery, small boats, anti-aircraft sites, bunkers, infantry, ammo storage, rocket launchers, and radar sites. And talked about the Marines a couple times. Talked about Amphibious Group 2 during Desert Shield. During Desert Storm, Amphibious Group 3 went into the region, again trying to trick the Iraqis to thinking there was a big amphibious group getting ready to land in Kuwait. It was the largest amphibious group assembled in 30 years. So that was since the Korean War. 17,000 Marines ready, and again, acting as a diversion. And the ships of Amphibious Group 3 had covers, the Anchorage, the Barber County, the Frederick, the Denver, an LPD, and a photo of the LPD Denver. The Germantown, Juneau, Mobile, Mount Vernon. I don't have a Juneau cover. And the cover in the center from the Mount Vernon's kind of a more attractive Wentworth cache, Operation Desert Shield, even though this was postmarked after Desert Storm. Other ships in New Orleans, the Peoria, and the Tarawa, and a nice non-philatelic cover from a lieutenant, probably a Marine, aboard the Tarawa. The Tripoli, one other ship in that amphibious group, a nice attractive patch, Admiral Byrd chapter cover. And the Vancouver, an LPD. They distributed propaganda leaflets, and this one's kind of a unique one because it ties to the Marine Amphibious Group. These were dropped on the Iraqi troops, trying to convince them to surrender. This is the front and back of this leaflet. If you look at the back, there's in 2 languages, one being English, and it says, "Cease fire, be safe. To seek refuge safely, the bearer must strictly adhere to the following procedures. Remove the magazine from your weapon, sling the weapon over your left shoulder, muzzle down, have both arms raised above your head, and approach the multinational forces position slowly with the lead soldier holding this document above his head. And if you do this, you will not die." If you look at the drawing or caricature, if you look at it closely, what looks like a wave is actually a Marine. You can see a face near the American flag. You can see the Marine emblem near the face. And the curling wave is actually an arm and hand holding a knife, and the Iraqi soldiers are running. Definitely a propaganda leaflet. I thought this was an interesting map just to show the sheer number of ships that were involved and were in the Gulf at the time. This is a map somebody, a sailor aboard the Marvin Shields drew. Particular date was February 11th. There are over 80 ships shown here. Awful lot of naval concentration. The red are U.S. Navy ships, and the green are British ships. Awful lot of ships a little bit south of Kuwait, off of Bahrain, Qatar. You can see the infamous Strait of Hormuz over here, where the USS Francis Hammond and the Harry W. Hill are on the right-hand side. Some of the ships, not in the groups, but ships were there for support during Desert Storm. Got some covers from some of them. Here's the Midway, nice philatelic, non-philatelic sent from a sailor. He must have been an airplane modeler because he sent us something to the magazine RC Modeler. A bird chapter cover, a Truman Botar cover, a nice cachet for the USNS Curtis, Stuart Milstein cover. And a Wentworth cover for the cruiser Mobile Bay, another bird chapter cover, another non-philatelic from the Philippine Sea cruiser. And the frigate Ford, very nice clear photo of the USS Ford. There were still support ships there. USNS ship, the Henry J. Kaiser, MV Falcon Champion, and the USS Santa Barbara, and the USNS Mohawk. Again, some of these covers just surprised me that they were being serviced at the time, but obviously they were. And a couple other support ships. USNS Catawba was a tug, the American Osprey, a tanker, and then the frigate Vreeland. And the USNS Comet, a roll-on, roll-off cargo ship. A couple more support ships, MV Green Lake and the Katanging. And I mentioned the mine warfare. Princeton and Tripoli struck mines in the Gulf. Both were damaged, but both did not sink, and they returned to service. So here's covers from the Princeton and Tripoli. And Crowley had a tug over there. I thought this was a unique cachet. Canceled right during the middle of a Desert Storm. And I've got a few other surrender leaflets I threw in here I thought were interesting to see. This one's printed face and back. Don't know what the words say, or actually I did do it on Google once, and they are kind of typical propaganda words, but you can see the reverse caricature shows an American soldier with an Iraqi soldier. He's got his rifle magazine removed, muzzle down, pamphlet in his hand, surrendering, and he's having thoughts of his family. Nice propaganda leaflet. Some other ones, you can see Saddam caricature and the one on the face, and a bomb on the one on the left. This one's printed to look like currency with the wording. All the wording on the back matches the English I read earlier from that other leaflet. I did translate this one in Google Translate, and it's titled Safe Conduct Pass. And one other one I have with Saddam and some verbiage. And I mentioned the ground war. I'm not going to talk a lot about the ground war, but the ground war lasted for 3 days, actually 100 hours. The M1 tank was the U.S. Army's main tank, and here's some going across the desert. Here's a map of what occurred during the ground war, kind of interesting to me. The colored symbols are the shoulder sleeve insignia of the different American Army groups. The blue arrows show where they went during those 3 days. Again, this was 100 hours, February 24th through the 28th. The white rectangles you can see, certainly in the Kuwait area, those are Iraqi units. So kind of a good representation of how the battle went, and you can see how the troops came from our troops came from Saudi Arabia, went north, and then turned east into Kuwait. Talked about naval aircraft earlier. There were 6 combat losses during Desert Shield, 5 non-combat. The planes that were lost are shown: a Hornet, 4 intruders, a Tomcat, a couple Hornets, an intruder, a Seahawk, and one other helicopter non-combat losses with 3 POWs, 2 missing in action, and 5 killed in action from those losses. You probably remember, like I remember, that the Iraqis, when they retreated, they lit oil wells on fire. They lit the trenches that had oil in them on fire. Just about anything that could burn, they lit it on fire. And here's a very nice picture with U.S. Air Force planes flying over the burning oil wells. And maybe like me, you can remember the name Red Adair, who was contracted to go over there and put out fires. And also, like me, you may remember that General Schwarzkopf did a press conference, and it's kind of referred to as a mother of all news conferences. It's just about an hour long. You can find it on YouTube. I think it's a fascinating news conference. He's very blunt, he's very direct, he's very honest. He talks about how 29 Iraqi divisions were destroyed, how they had taken 50,000 Iraqi prisoners. He cites how many were American servicemen were wounded in action, killed in action, POWs, 9 POWs, as a matter of fact. And he gave an assessment of Saddam Hussein's value as a general, which was not a very good assessment. Fascinating news conference. It's on YouTube. And here's a cover signed by General Schwarzkopf. Hard to read the cancel, but it's February 91. So it's right during the middle of the Desert Storm. And the end of the war. I've got a cover from the Bird chapter, canceled in Washington, marking the last day of the war, February 27th. And that sort of led to something called Operation Farewell, really an official operation and no real end date, but everything that went over to Saudi Arabia had to come back somewhere. And the same merchant ships that carried it over had to carry it back. Here we have the SS Agent, the Australighting, and the SS Zola Likes. The SS Aid, a break bulk carrier, and again a picture, and again one more ship that just really doesn't look like the others that we've seen. Just such a variety of merchant ships involved. A French ship still around in April of 91. Nice cachets, and they're mentioning Operation Artemon, which is their name for the operation. I think this is a nice cover. A flown cover, kind of like the other one. This one's also, I think, very interesting. Flown aboard a CH-46 Sea Knight. Says it was going from the USS Seattle to the USS John F. Kennedy, transferring the Seattle CO to the JFK as part of the battle group returning after Desert Storm. Kind of a neat cover. And there were a few welcome home covers made for the groups as they came home. I do not know who made this cover. It's fairly common. I see them on eBay every now and then. But it's welcoming home the Saratoga battle group. And somebody made a cachet for the cruiser Normandy, welcoming them home from their first deployment. And Taze Nicholson as they always did for things running in, ships coming into Norfolk. Has some here. Upper left, we got the John F. Kennedy battle group. Upper right, we have the Guam and the Nassau. Lower left, we have the Theodore Roosevelt battle group. And on the lower right, we have the Wisconsin and a cruiser Biddle and Thomas C. Hart frigate welcoming home. The Brits also made their covers. Here's an interesting one from June of 91, paying tribute to the Royal Navy and some helicopters. And if you read the cachet, it talks about several ships who were on the firing line, and they had Lynx helicopters armed with Sea-Skua missiles and infrared jammers, and they sank 12 Iraqi war vessels. And the two autographs, one of them is the captain of the HMS Gloucester, and the lower one is a flight commander, probably a helicopter flight commander from the HMS Brazen. Both of them were awarded DSCs for that operation. And a similar cover, because the Brits had a large air force over there. These are Tornado fighter bombers. And this talks about their role. And I'm just going to read it. On one such mission, the Tornado, flown by pilot squadron leader Baston and navigator wing commander Heath of 20 Squadron, detached to Royal Saudi Air Force based at Tabuk, suffered a controls restriction over Saudi Arabia and crashed in the desert. And both lived to tell the tale, and that's both of their signatures and autographs there. So again, kind of a neat cover. And I finish up the presentation with also kind of a neat cover. Saudi Arabia postage canceled in Saudi Arabia 1 year after the end of Desert Storm. So February 1992. And with that, that is the end of my presentation.